Yeah, this is our second webinar of, I guess, the season. And obviously, we're talking with Dorothy about rain gardens. Uh, I'll give a little spiel about your work. Dorothy works for the Natural Resources Conservation District, where she manages clean water and natural resources projects like riparian buffer plantings and floodplain restoration. And she's involved in some education initiatives and has a background in farming and ecological design. So, there's not many people here, but if you can keep your mics off until the end, that'd be great. Leave questions in the chat, and this will be recorded, and I can put the link to our other webinars in the comment section as well. Um, yeah, I'll turn it over to Dorothy. You should be able to share your screen.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, are you seeing that? Is it on full screen?
Yep, you're good.
Great. All right, well, thanks for the introduction and thanks for joining me this evening. This webinar is about rain gardens, and it's the kind of the second webinar building off of a previous webinar that Franklin County Stormwater held last year, introducing rain gardens. This will be introducing you to what a rain garden is and how to plan one, design one, as well as troubleshooting some issues that you might encounter with your rain garden. A little bit more background on myself. I grew up in southern Vermont and moved north to go to UVM, where I studied environmental studies, focusing on sustainable agriculture and food systems, and also dabbling a little bit in landscape design. After graduating, I worked on a few farms and also in restaurants. And then after a few years, I wanted to go back to school, and I went to a small graduate program at the Conway School in Northampton, Massachusetts, where I studied ecological landscape design. After graduating from there, I did a little bit of landscaping and landscape design, took care of some gardens. Um, and then in 2023, I believe, I joined the Franklin County Natural Resources Conservation District. And I'll just point out that this garden in the photo here is one that I cared for in Richmond. It's about 300 feet away from the Winooski River. And in the time I cared for it in 2023 and 2024, it flooded 3 times. So in the work I've done, I do think a lot about where water is moving, how it's moving through the landscape. And so rain gardens are definitely a piece of that. So to start off, I'll cover some basics about rain gardens, what they are, and some planning considerations, and then function and maintenance over time, what you can expect for caring for your rain garden season to season, and then looking at those common issues and how to address them. Starting off with the basics, what is a rain garden? A rain garden is a garden designed to capture and absorb stormwater runoff, typically from impervious surfaces like roofs, parking areas, and sidewalks. These are a stormwater management tool that you might employ along with other strategies for directing and managing stormwater on your property. There's a lot of different ways you can design and install your rain garden. They can be pretty simple, just depressions. They can be a little bit more extravagant, and we'll talk about some of that. Why plant a rain garden? Rain gardens help support clean water, especially in urban and developed areas. In urban areas where you have lots of paved streets and sidewalks and buildings, there's a lot of impervious surface. And so when it rains, that stormwater, is trying to just figure out where to flow, and it doesn't have many opportunities to sink into the ground. And often it will just find these storm drains and the stormwater infrastructure that's been designed into the urban environment. But what can happen when we have a rainstorm, even a small one, is if all that water is going to the sewage system or a stormwater system, it can become overwhelmed. That's definitely an issue with combined sewage systems that are receiving wastewater and stormwater. And then if you get too much stormwater at once, you can have, released untreated wastewater released into our rivers and lakes. So definitely water quality concern. And so in urban areas, if we create spaces like rain gardens where we can slow infiltrate some stormwater, it can definitely help improve water quality and reduce some of the concerns that we see. And one kind of metric that blew my mind when I first encountered it is that 1 inch of rain over 1 acre is 27,154 gallons of water. So even, a kind of modest storm can produce a lot of water. And if that is mostly impervious surfaces, it will be a lot of runoff. With climate change, Vermont is getting wetter with increased frequency of extreme precipitation events. As I mentioned, that garden I took care of in Richmond had 3 major floods in like a 2-year period. And we've seen a lot of flooding throughout Vermont. And rain gardens aren't going to solve everything, but it's definitely a piece of thinking about how we manage stormwater. So planning your rain garden. Creating a successful rain garden, really depends on thoughtful, comprehensive planning and site analysis. Some of my background is in landscape design, and a lot of that, I'd say 80% of the design work is just doing site analysis and really understanding the landscape that you're working in, what is present, and how to work with it to make a design that really supports all the goals that you have. Some things you might consider with planning your rain garden are slope and drainage patterns, soils, depth to water table or restrictive feature, sun and shade, utilities, traffic and circulation patterns. And I'll be diving into these a little bit more. So since we're talking about managing stormwater, it's really important to understand slopes and drainage patterns on your property. It's a great idea to just stand outside or maybe look out your window when it's raining and observe where water flows on your property and where it pools. Also think about what impervious surfaces are on your property or nearby that you're receiving runoff from, and how big are those areas. If you're designing a rain garden, you also have to know how much stormwater you're trying to capture, what area of impervious surface the stormwater is being directed from. It's also good to consider what you want to or what you need to direct water away from. So typically these are building foundations or high traffic areas. Like if you have a path through your backyard, you probably don't want it to just become a, muddy puddle. There also might be areas like vegetable gardens that you want to reduce flooding from, and then things like leach fields that really need to function well and that you don't want water just pooling over. And then another consideration when you're planning your rain garden is how are you getting water to the rain garden from some of those impervious surfaces or areas that you're directing runoff away from. And so in this, can you see my mouse? Maybe.
Yeah, we can.
Great. So in this sketch here of like a house footprint, you might have runoff that you're trying to direct from the roof and from the driveway of the house. And maybe your leach field is buried in the front here, so that's not a good spot for a rain garden. And maybe you have a path that goes around and like a nice tree in the back, and you don't want to disturb the roots of that tree by constructing your rain garden. So you might identify that, okay, there's this good spot in the backyard that's, would work for siting a rain garden. Do I need to maybe add some gutter downspouts, downspout extensions, and maybe even like a swale or a French drain or a trench drain to get the water from this driveway and from this the roof of this home to this rain garden. Another really, really important thing to consider and learn about when you're planning a rain garden are the soils on your property. So, first off, what type of soils are present? You may have seen this soil types pyramid, which just demonstrates different types of soil based on their proportion of clay particles, silt particles, and sand particles. In soil, sand is the larger particle size. It's particles that you can see with the naked eye. And with that, there's a lot of space between the particles, and that's space where where water can occupy. Sandy soils have really great infiltration, but they also might be, pretty sensitive to drought because there's not, water might just infiltrate too quickly through it. On the other side of that are the clay particles, which are very fine. This graphic on the upper right really doesn't demonstrate just the size, how dramatic the size difference is between sand and clay. Clay is microscopic. You can't see it. You can tell it's clay if you feel it, and it just feels smooth. And because those particles are so tiny, they really sit tightly together, and water does not infiltrate through clay quickly at all. So that can be a huge limitation for siting a rain garden, is water just won't pass through it quick enough. Another thing to learn about is what is the percent organic matter in your soil. So soil is not just this mineral component of sand, silt, and clay, but it's also the organic matter, which includes the living organic matter like worms and microbiota and macrobiota and bacteria and all sorts of things, but also decomposed organic material. And that can supply nutrients to plants growing. And it's also, it really helps soil retain water, and in some cases also can help improve infiltration of soils. And then also part of this composition of soil are these gaps where there's water and where there's air in the soil. Another thing to investigate with your soils is how deep are they? If you're siting a rain garden, if they're just a few inches deep and then you're hitting bedrock, it's probably not going to work out. So definitely before you buy all your plants and materials, get out there with a shovel and poke around a little bit. And then additionally, it's good to investigate and learn a little bit about the history of your property if possible, and whether there is fill or not, especially on, in developments and more developed like cul-de-sacs and neighborhoods. There might have been fill added. Sometimes that can have all sorts of surprises in it. I've done some projects in areas that, start digging into and you find old bottles or broken bricks. And that, you might be able to work with it, but good to know what's there. So some ways you can learn about your soil are doing at-home tests, like the shake test. This is where you you put a little bit of soil in a jar and fill it up with water, and then you just shake it around. And the first things to settle out are going to be those larger soil particles, like the sand, because those are big and heavy and just fall to the bottom. And then that will kind of form a distinct layer. And on top will be particles that are a little bit finer and hang out for a little bit longer before settling. And then this really tiny soil particles, like the clay, will remain suspended in the water for longer. So this can be a nice visual on like seeing the proportion of different particle sizes in your soil. Another at-home easy test is the ribbon test, which I don't have a graphic of, but if you take some kind of damp soil and like squeeze it between your fingers and kind of press it, if it starts to form a ribbon, and if that ribbon doesn't just immediately crumble, that tells you that your soil has quite a bit of clay in it. And if you have had experience with doing ceramics, you might pretty quickly be able to tell what clay, what soils are pretty heavy clay soils, because it will just feel like you're working with, working in a studio. There's also another test you can use, percolation test. I'll get into that a little bit later, but that will be helpful in understanding what site on your property might be the most suitable for siting a rain garden based off of how quickly water infiltrates into the ground. Some other things you might explore are some mapping resources like the USGS Soil Survey. That's an online tool where you can zoom into your property or your area and see what the mapped soil type is. This isn't necessarily what soil is on your property. The maps don't always match reality, but it can be a good indication. And along with the soil type, there's information about average depth to bedrock or average depth to water table, which is another really important thing to know is where's the water table on your property. If it's, a foot or a few inches below the soil surface, then you're not going to have too much infiltration. And it might not be a great spot to direct more water to. And then similarly, there's Vermont A&R Atlas. That is another online mapping tool with soils, as well as information about like slopes on your property and all sorts of other layers. And then another way you can learn about your soils is sending samples into a lab like UVM Extension. And this can give you information on nutrient levels, organic matter, and heavy metals. So again, if your property has been disturbed or if you're maybe planting edible species, it can be important to look at those heavy metals in particular. So lab testing isn't essential for planning and creating a rain garden, but it can be informative to future maintenance. And again, if you're planting edibles, if you're like near a home or on fill, definitely check out those heavy metals. If you haven't looked at a soil test previously, this is just one that I had from, I think, an apartment that I live, a garden at my apartment from a few years ago. And this is a test from the UVM Extension Lab. Some things that I would first look to are the soil organic matter. Ideally, you'd want like 5 or so percent. 2.5 in this case is on the low side, so I might want to add some more compost or some sort of organic matter. But also I'm noticing that the phosphorus levels of the soil are quite high. So maybe I don't want to add more like traditional bagged compost, but maybe the organic matter I add is like decomposed leaves, because I don't need to add more nutrients. And if I add more phosphorus, I'm just gonna, risk having that leach out into the water. And then I'm also gonna look at this heavy metals box at the bottom to see what amount in parts per million were found, and then kind of what is considered high. And if something is, especially high, I'm not gonna plant something I'm gonna eat, because that could be dangerous. Some additional analyses to conduct. Utilities. Definitely map out what is buried on your property, including cables, sewer, gas, leach fields, septic tanks. Um, you can call dig safe and they can map out some of that, or they'll mark it out actually with flags. Um, but also you might need to look at some documents you have for your house. If you have any, like, if you have a leach field septic system and plans from that, take a look at that and just understand before you start digging what you might be disturbing, and avoid doing that. And then a sun and shade analysis, not the most important, but definitely will inform what plants might be most applicable or the best choice for your site if you're in a full sun area versus a heavy shade area. This can be done through direct observation, or if you feel inclined and are tech savvy, there's some fun apps and programs you can use to develop these sun analysis models where it will even like go through different times a year and times a day and show you like where the shadows are, and will take into account buildings and slope and vegetation. And then finally, traffic and circulation. This includes, how do people move around the property and where are vehicles? If you have like a path on your property, you might not want to direct water to that area or through that area because then it can become a kind of point of conflict and potentially a little bit messy. So getting into the annual maintenance, right now we're in the winter, so there's not too much you need to do if you have a rain garden. And this is thinking about maintenance, if you already have a rain garden on your property. If your rain garden has woody species, the winter and early spring before bud break is a perfect time to do some pruning if needed, but not too much else to do right now. Once we get into spring and the snow melts and you can actually see your garden, there might be a little bit more. The first thing to do would be to remove any debris. And if there's like an accumulation of sediment, maybe scoop that out. Inspect inlets and outlets to your rain garden and see if they're blocked up. I know, sometimes if you have like a downspout extension, that could be a nice spot for like a mouse or a vole to hang out. Nice protected spot for the winter. So, clear out any of that, or if there's an accumulation of leaves at the inlet from the fall, clear those out. Check for erosion and washouts, especially if there's, a lot of snow melt at once and some more disturbance. And then, assess if there needs to be some additional stabilization with rocks or maybe additional planting. If not everything was cut back in the fall, you can cut back dead plant material as needed, and also replenish mulch. And if there's space, or maybe if there's some dieback or some plants that didn't do well, the spring is a great time to conduct additional planting. Once you get into summer, the main things are weed management and watering. Like any garden, if you want it to look the way you want it to look with the species that you want, you're gonna have to do some weeding. A common weed that I've been noticing around my house and in my gardens, unfortunately, has been this bindweed, which can really overtake things and kind of choke out other species. So that's a good one to keep an eye on and take out as soon as you see it. If your garden is, still kind of new and within its first few years of being established, it's a good idea to water it at least 1 inch per week, and that's including rain. So if it rains a couple times in a week, you're good. But if not, and if there's a bit of a drought, you should hit it with a hose. And yeah, again, watch for any invasive or nuisance species as you do your weeding and maintenance of your garden. And then as we get into the fall, do some strategic plant cutbacks. I know sometimes I'll see a garden in the fall that's basically scalped and everything is cut to the ground, but if you don't need to do that, if you are okay with leaving some things up and having a little bit more work in the spring, um, leaving the dead stems can add some winter interest. It can also be really great forage and wildlife habitat, especially those seed heads. And there's insects that like to overwinter kind of in the stems or in tufted, like the base of tufted grasses. So there's really some benefit to leaving that over the winter. You can like cut it back a little bit or, um, cut it back in the spring to make way for the new growth and clean things up, but not necessary to cut everything back in the fall. If there is a lot of like heavy leaf buildup in the basin of your rain garden in the fall, you can clear that out, especially in the entrance or um, outflow areas of your rain garden. And then also the fall is a great time to divide up overcrowded perennials or perennials that are getting a little bit big for the space. And that's kind of a nice piece of having these gardens and gardens with perennials is you basically have your own little plant nursery. So now getting into rain garden troubleshooting and looking at some problems you might encounter with your rain garden and how to address them. So the first problem that you might encounter is that your garden is always wet and there just seems to always be water pooled inside of it. It's not infiltrating into the soils. This is possibly maybe likely due to poor planning and siting a rain garden in an area with poor soil drainage paired with directing additional runoff to those areas. Sometimes I've done a site visit with a property owner who says, this area of my lawn is always wet. I think it'd be a great spot for a rain garden. It's not a bad idea to plant water loving species in an area that is wet and has pooling water, but calling it a rain garden doesn't make it a rain garden. And if you're also directing, roof runoff or runoff from like a patio or a driveway to an area that already has water just sitting and pooling, it's just going to get even more wet and overflow possibly. So if that's the case with your garden, if it's just kind of always wet, it might be time for a little bit of an overhaul or adding additional stormwater management features on your property. So, if your rain garden does have pooling water in it for longer than desired, what you could do, and this would be a bit of work, is to add a filter bed to the garden. Oh, I might have made my slides a little bit out of order. So filter bed is kind of this additional layer of soil in your rain garden that has a better infiltration rate. And so this really depends whether you have a filter bed in your garden or not, in your rain garden, depends on what the infiltration of the existing soil on your property is. If it's poor, like if it doesn't infiltrate quickly, then you should probably add some material that does allow for a little bit more water storage capacity and increased infiltration rate. And so a simple recipe for the filter bed mix be 80 to 90% sand with some topsoil and organic matter. Also, including a filter bed in your rain garden can reduce the overall area that your rain garden needs to be sized for, based off of how much runoff it's receiving. So I'll skip back to this percolation test. This really gets back to just understanding the soils on your property and doing some comprehensive site analysis. And doing a percolation test can be a really good, step to complete when planning a rain garden and understanding the soils on your property and whether it's, a good location for a rain garden or whether or not you might want to include a filter bed in the design. So I'll quickly run through the steps of conducting a percolation test. These are also pulled from the Vermont Rain Garden Manual, which is a great resource. If you haven't looked at it, highly recommend. And I'll share that at the end as well. So the first step would be to dig a hole that's 2 to 3 feet deep, ideally in the spring. 2 to 3 feet is deeper than you're going to be making your rain garden typically, unless you're adding a filter bed. The reason you want to do that in the spring is because that's when the water table is at its highest typically. And that's important to really know, like, where in the ground is that water sitting? And, if the area is receiving stormwater runoff, is it going into the soil? Is it immediately just hitting that that water table and maybe not infiltrating further down? And so once you dig your hole, you want to first see if there's standing water. And if there is, within 24 inches of the soil, maybe consider siting the rain garden elsewhere. The second step is to fill the hole with water and take a note of, what time you filled it at, and then record the time that it takes the hole to drain. And then you are gonna repeat that step 2 more times. And that's supposed to simulate, a few storms or a few periods where there might be precipitation. Because if your soil already has water, and if it's rained recently, you want to know, like, how much can it take? What does it look like if there's maybe a pretty rainy week? Can this continue to take water and infiltrate it? And then with those time recordings of when you filled the hole, how long it took to empty, you'll do calculations of how many inches per hour the water is infiltrating into the ground at. And if the slowest test is less than 1/2 inch per hour, you can dig deeper to see if the soils are better. Maybe there is just a layer of like clay or some slightly, denser soil material. And then repeat the test and see if your infiltration rates are better. And if not, you can consider siting the rain garden elsewhere or including a filter bed to improve those infiltration rates and add a little bit more storage capacity. With the sandy material, it adds some more gaps between the soil where water can collect. So another common problem with many gardens is that weeds are overtaking them. Like any garden, especially any garden that you want to maintain for a certain aesthetic, you'll probably want to do some, or you'll need to do some regular weeding and maintenance. Another reason why weeds might be overtaking your garden is that it's just not planted densely enough, and there's not enough competition. So in this lower left picture, this is an aesthetic that some folks like, with kind of a canvas of mulch, but that's just a huge opportunity for other plants to get established. And it's going to take a lot of work and frequent maintenance to keep that area weed free. So some solutions to weeds overtaking the garden: just doing some more regular weeding, and then planting ground covers and increasing planting density to just reduce the opportunities for weeds to just take over. Some ground covers that I would recommend for a rain garden include windflower, spotted cranesbill, which is this purple flower, and foam flower, which is this white flower, lady's mantle, and ferns like this rock polypody. Over this past summer, I was involved with a rain garden installation, and we looked, in the surrounding landscape to see what plants like to grow there, what's already present in the area. And we needed to add some ground cover to the planting. We noticed this rock polypody, and it's really this nice little fern that was growing in the forest floor of the area. So you can also source flowers and plants just from the surrounding area. And those will probably be successful in your garden because they're already growing nearby. Another issue you might encounter is that the rain garden overflows into a problem area, like a building foundation or a walkway. So a solution here is to just redesign and adjust the outlet. I think with rain gardens, there's a lot of thought as to how water gets to the garden, but maybe not always as much planning for where it goes once it starts to overflow. Because with, some of these large rainstorms we're getting, you probably don't have enough space on your property to create a large enough rain garden to receive all of that runoff. If we're getting like a large rainstorm like we've had in the past few years. So thinking about, okay, once this does fill up, once it can't infiltrate into the ground as fast as it's receiving water, where am I directing the overflow? And so as you're excavating your rain garden and, creating the kind of berm or the grade around it, creating a little bit of a depression, an area where water will start to flow out of, ideally directing this to another vegetated area, and at least away from your home, or if there's like, a high traffic area or a walkway where it might be a problem. Another thing we see with rain gardens is erosion and washouts where water enters the garden. And this can be caused by water entering the garden at a high velocity, especially if it's coming right out of a downspout or off of a sloped impervious surface. So, this is a common sight around a downspout where it's just like bare, muddy soils. And that's because the water, as it's flowing out, does have quite a bit of force. And so a way to mitigate that erosion in your rain garden and where the water is entering the garden is to add some 3 to 6 inch stone at the entrance. And that's kind of illustrated here. You've got this downspout extension and then a little area with stone where that water is hitting the stone, it's slowing down, and then it's spreading out and flowing into the garden at a gentler rate. Another issue that folks can encounter with their rain gardens are sediments and debris accumulating in the garden and just like filling it up. And this is, especially a problem in areas where the water is coming off of like a lawn or maybe like a parking area. Not so much an issue if it's just coming off of the roof. This sediment and debris might be soil particles. It could include leaves and lawn clippings, and maybe even trash. So if your rain garden is receiving water from an area where it's accumulating these debris, some solutions might be to include a forebay. And these photos show some kind of more engineered forebays where water is flowing into this chamber. It's, it's got this grate to maybe keep out some of the larger debris. Um, and then it's creating a spot for those soil particles, especially the larger particles that are a little bit quicker to settle out. And then you can just scoop out that sediment at a later point. In a like smaller rain garden at your home, a forebay could just look like, um, a little bit more of a gentler bowl shape. Doesn't have to be this like purchased, constructed, more engineered component. Oh, and then I'll add that another thing you can do to maybe reduce the amount of sediment ending up in your garden is just looking at upland areas and seeing, okay, if there's a lot of sediment, a lot of soil accumulating in my garden, is there an upland area that's eroding that maybe could be stabilized with some additional planting or reducing the velocity of water in some way so that there's not that erosion happening. So I think that covers most of the, common challenges you might encounter with your rain garden. And I just wanted to share some resources for planning and maintaining your rain garden. The first is this rain garden manual for Vermont and the Lake Champlain Basin. This manual has some really great illustrations. It has plant palettes and information on planning your rain garden and designing it. Another resource is the Vermont Guide to Stormwater Management for homeowners and small businesses. Rain gardens are just one tool in the toolkit of stormwater management practices, but it's certainly not the only thing. And there are lots of other stormwater management practices that you can use alongside a rain garden to manage stormwater on your property. And so this outlines other stormwater management practices and also can help you decide which practice might be the most applicable for different settings on your property. There's also this guide for maintaining rain gardens, swales, and stormwater planters put out by Oregon State Extension. And this has some nice lists of like what to maintenance steps basically for your rain garden and what to do in different seasons. I think it also has plant palettes, but those are not so applicable because it's for Oregon. There's also, I think this was the 2008 Vermont Rain Garden Manual. This is a little bit different than the current Vermont Rain Garden Manual, and it has a really great plant list and also has these fun like sample rain garden planting designs. So if you need a little bit more guidance or inspiration for like what plants to plant in your rain garden, they have a few ideas for like, a full sun garden or like a meadow inspired garden, or in this case, the enchanted garden for park shade. So it can show you, for a certain area of a garden, how many plants you might need, what species, and information on, their height, spread, etc. Some websites to explore include rethinkrunoff.org, which includes information on Vermont water quality, engagement opportunities, and resources for land stewards. Franklin County Stormwater also has a lot of great resources, including recordings from previous webinars. A few resources for plant palettes include the Lake Champlain Sea Grant Green Infrastructure Plant List, and also Rethink Runoff, Guide to Rain Garden Plants, as both of those are great plant palettes. Getting back to site analysis, some of those tools I mentioned, US Geological Survey, Soil Survey, for learning about what the mapped soil types are around your property, and Vermont A&R Atlas, which has information on all sorts of layers of information, including soil types, watershed, slopes, uh, topography lines. And that can be helpful for starting to create, a map of your property. That might be more than you need for creating a rain garden, but fun to explore. Learning about your property, using apps like Seek and PlantNet, and just identifying what species are present around your property can be really informative, especially, what different plants can tell you about the conditions on your site. And then there's also property assessments and consultations that different organizations, including the Franklin County Natural Resources Conservation District, can conduct, and we can visit your property. And these include things like streamwise, lakewise, and stormwater assessments. And so that can be a great idea to just get another set of eyes on your property and maybe run some ideas by, especially if you're thinking about installing a rain garden or maybe need to troubleshoot some challenges on your property. So that's all I had. Thanks for joining me this evening. Feel free to ask any questions, but also if anything comes up later on, you're welcome to email me or also get in touch with the district. And if you'd like to explore our website, learn a little bit about the Franklin County NRCD, our website is franklincountynrcd.org.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, time. Do you know offhand if usually the plants that are recommended to plant, a whole list, would they pretty much always be considered native plants or at least almost native? I can't remember what the word is, cultivars or whatever.
Yeah. The plant lists from the resources that I shared are mostly native or naturalized, plants that won't be like a concern as like an invasive. And many of these plant lists, I think, also like do somehow note whether the plant is native.
And I had to take a phone call for a moment. And would you mind just saying a little bit more about what filter beds are? It's not anything it's not a tub of some sort that you're putting into the ground, is it? I missed.
No.
Sorry.
Yeah, let me get back to that. I think I breezed by it. Okay. So in a rain garden, you can just have a rain garden that is the like native or present soils on your site, and you just kind of excavate this depression where water is directed to and can pool. But if your soil maybe is a little bit heavier and doesn't have a great infiltration rate, a filter bed is just a mixture of soil that has a better infiltration rate. So sometimes it's a mixture of like sand, topsoil, organic matter. There's like bioretention mixes that I'm not sure where in Vermont sells them, but sometimes there are these like particular mixes that are made for these types of practices, but you can also mix your own by kind of just adding some more sand into topsoil.
So you're digging a depression and then filling in with this.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
there had been the question in the chat about the link to, you refer to it as the USGS soil survey. I think you mean the USDA survey.
Well, yeah, I thought, yeah, I heard, was there something that's USGS is what I thought I heard. Was there?
Yeah, that's what Dorothy said, and it's a USDA, but and I just was wondering if you had a favorite link for getting that because um, I tend to go to the old published version, so I don't know,
Mhm.
and there aren't a lot of those around. So, um, do you have a favorite source for the online version?
Yeah, my apologies for getting the initialism wrong.
Oh, it's okay.
Um, I if you look up soil survey, I guess I could maybe find a link to that and drop it in the chat. I If I look up soil survey, I usually find the old school website.
Yeah, the way I've encountered it is there's a green button that you don't always think of
That's
as the way
it.
that you have to start it.
I mean, if folks have the time, I'm happy to like show that.
Love to see it.
Um, can you see that on the screen, or maybe I need to change how I'm sharing?
It shows.
Still seeing, oh yeah, there you go.
Okay, you can see the soil survey.
Yep.
Mhm.
Oh,
Great. Yep. So there's the green button. Yep. websoilsurvey.nrcs.usda.gov. And then you hit that green button. And are you still seeing? Are you seeing a
Seeing,
new map?
yes,
Mhm.
seeing the map.
Great. Okay, so we can do zoom zoom in to somewhere in Vermont, in this case. We're in Saint Albans. And so then I'm going to click on this area of interest and just make a square. And then there's these tabs up here of soil map, and you can just see like what are the mapped soils in this area, and what percent of the polygon or the square that you've made are these different types of soils. And then if you click on one of those, I think it will pull up, yeah, some information about this type of soil. So again, this is like not 100% accurate for every location, but it can be a good idea of what is on your property. And this has some information, including like drainage class,
hmm.
depth to restrictive feature, so like bedrock, runoff class. And then it's been a little while since I've been on this, but there is a way to download a report. I think this create download link, and that will regenerate this report that has the area of interest that you outlined and the mapped soil types and information about those soils. And yeah, this is a bit of an old school website. I think it's been the same since I was first introduced to it like 12 years ago.
It's not nearly as old school as the published book.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I guess I've seen those books, and those are, yep. So yeah, fun to explore.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. This was good information.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dorothy. That was a great presentation.
Yeah.
Will be a great addition to our webinars, and I think we all learned a lot. So, yeah. Um, if no one else has any other questions, I will quickly drop. That's the link to where our recorded webinars go. If any of you want to look at it, this will be posted tomorrow. So if you want to go back and rewatch, yeah, I think that's all I have. So everyone else is good. Thank you all for coming, and yeah, have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.